Hey everybody, and welcome to this video, in which I want to show you around my desk setup. It took me some time to figure it out, but I think now I'm at a point where I'm comfortable with it and it works pretty much perfectly for me. I work in the home office permanently as a freelance software engineer, so maybe if you're working on a new setup or upgrading yours, you can get some inspiration from mine and hopefully improve your work situation that way. So let's start with the Deskplate. This is my Deskplate. It's a pretty boring wooden plate from Ikea that I bought roughly 10 years ago for 30 euros. What I really like about it is that it's quite deep, which means that if I sit at the desk and work in front of my monitor with my keyboard and mouse, I'm still relatively far away from the screen, which makes it more comfortable for me to sit on the desk and work and also view stuff on the screen. Now, throughout the 10 years, it's been going through some stuff and quite a few iterations of this desk setup too. So it has a whole bunch of holes in the bottom from different feet, different cable channels and so on. And it also has a few nicks and scratches here and there, but nothing too major. And overall, I would say for a 30 euro desk plate, it's been holding up incredibly well. And so far, none of this has been a problem. Like all the holes in the bottom, even when I did like this third iteration of the desk setup, I believe, it was still fine and I could still screw in everything I needed to the bottom, even with a bunch of holes in it. So for 30 euros after 10 years, I would say this was a great purchase. I can very much recommend this really boring Ikea wooden desk plate. The next component of the whole setup is the actual desk that the desk plate is sitting on. And for that, I have recently upgraded to this Flexispot H2B, I believe it's called, desk stand. It's a standing desk that can manually move up and down. I have intentionally decided to not get an electronic one because I read some reviews that stated that the electronic ones would break after a few years of use. Specifically, the electronics would break. And so I've decided to go with a manual one because I am planning to use this for quite a few years, hopefully, if it holds up. And I just thought the manual mechanics would probably be simpler and work a bit more reliably over quite a few years. Other than that, I will probably be making a separate video on the standing desk itself to explain why I went for it, and I will go into detail about this specific standing desk. I think there are a lot of options, a lot of way more expensive ones than this, and yeah, I want to talk about why I chose this one and why I feel like this is also appropriate for the price. Other than that, there's not too much to it. It's rated for 80 kilograms, I believe, which is practical because I can just put everything I want on top of it. It also goes pretty wide, which was necessary for the desk plate I have. So for me, this was a great choice so far. I don't regret the purchase at all. And yeah, I can recommend it. And while I'm already down here showing you around the desk, I also want to point out this hook that I put under the desk. It's from a Yamaha piano, and it just usually screws into the bottom of the piano so that you can put your headphones on it. I had a spare one and I thought it would be really cool to put this on the desk so that when the standing desk itself goes up and down, the headphones go with it and it also stores them really cleanly. So my headphones live here under the desk always, and when I need them I can just really quickly grab them from underneath. Whether the desk is in the up or down position, they're always at the same place. So when sitting at this desk for hours on end, it's also important to have a good chair. During my student times, I usually sat on a fairly cheap Ikea chair, which worked reasonably well. But now that I'm sitting at this desk for hours and hours every day, I thought it makes sense to invest in a really good chair. And after a few attempts with chairs that didn't work for me at all, I settled on this one by a German company called Topstar. What's cool about it is that the back and the seating part kind of angle together so that when you sit on it, your back is always kept in a nice straight position, which should in the long term really improve my back health. And yeah, I don't regret this purchase at all. What's also cool about it is that the armrests are height adjustable, so you can go up and down with them. And they can go so far up that they are above the actual desk plate when the desk is in the down position. What that means is that you can kind of rest your arms on the side, on the armrests, and still go fairly close to the desk and type with your hands kind of in the air and not rest your wrists on the desk, which is a much more natural and better position to type on for long hours. So I can recommend a chair with a good armrest that goes high enough so it goes above the desk plate. It will really improve your typing, and especially if you work long hours, it'll make you way more comfortable. Next, let's talk about cable management. To make this easy, I have installed this Ikea cable channel under my desk. I've had this for quite some years as well, and basically all my accessories that are connected to my MacBook go in this cable channel with all their recording cables, and then they rise and lower together with the desk so there's no strain on the cables. Going a bit further to the back of the desk, you can see that I have a MacBook Pro here that is resting on, well, this basically cooling plate that I bought from Amazon. The problem that I had was that my MacBook ran a little bit hot when I ran it for hours and hours with video conferences and a lot of tabs in Chrome, for example, open. So the fan kicked in at some point, which started to annoy me. So I bought this €20 cooling pad from Amazon that you just turn on. It has 3 fans that are way more silent than the MacBook's fans and just cool it down a little bit, which so far worked reasonably well. Once Apple comes out with the new Mac Mini, I will be replacing this MacBook Pro with the Mac Mini because, to be honest, the MacBook Pro was great during my student life while I had to go to university and everywhere. But now doing permanent home office and especially during a pandemic, I don't really take this MacBook anywhere, but it's just in clamshell mode all the time connected here to my desk. So once Apple is coming out with the new Mac Mini, I will be replacing it with that, so maybe stay tuned for a review of that. When it comes to connecting this MacBook Pro to the rest of the desk setup, I run a single USB-C cable out of the back that is connected to the screen up top that we're going to talk about in just a minute. Because the desk is going up and down though, the cable of the screen itself wasn't long enough to reach all the way down. So I run a single USB-C extension cable basically, which worked surprisingly well and didn't affect my data transmission speeds to the drives or anything at all. So I'm really happy with that. All the cables that run down, like also power and stuff, come down this single cable channel tube kind of affair. And so everything is nicely cable managed, and when I run the desk up and down, none of the cables get tangled and I can always chill. As a last comment regarding my cable management situation, I also screwed this surge protected power socket affair in the bottom of my desk plate so that even all the power plugs just go into the desk and rise and lower with the desk so that there's no problems with cable management. Now that we've seen the underside of the desk and everything that is there for cable management, it is now time to go to the exciting bits. And let's actually start with the screen. For years I've had a 1440p 27-inch screen, which worked actually really well for me. It was basically an Apple Cinema display, and I was really happy with it. But after a few years I thought it was time to upgrade to something a bit better, and I went for this 32-inch LG 4K screen. I'll put the link to the exact model down in the description, so if you want to check it out you can. What I like about this screen in specific is that it runs off a single USB-C cable and has some integrated USB ports in it so that I can basically run a single cable to my computer and then everything else out of the screen. Additionally, I really like that it has support for the P3 color space and is actually factory calibrated. So that means when I'm doing video editing and color critical work, also maybe photo editing, that usually the color should look about right on the screen. Obviously, it's not going to be as accurate as Apple's Pro Display, for example, but for what I do, it's easily good enough, and it's of course better than any uncalibrated screen. So I have to say, without measuring it with any professional tools, to my eye it looks pretty accurate. I've done some prints, they all looked pretty accurate to the screen, so I'm overall really happy with it, and I think for the price point, it's pretty much as good as you can get. If you come here around the screen with me, you can see that it's basically mounted on this one arm. Now the cool thing about this arm is that it can rotate in every direction. It's mounted on basically 2 joints that you can pivot in any way. The arm itself can also rotate, so you can turn the screen to wherever you want. And the screen itself on the arm can even pivot into portrait mode basically. So if you are working on a long document or looking at hundreds of lines of code, then you can basically just pop the monitor into an upright mode and see most of your code on one screen, which is super cool, and I actually use that from time to time when I'm coding on big projects. Additionally, what's really cool about the arm is that it has an integrated cable management solution. So all the cables that run from my screen back here down to the computer or to the cable channel, they all run through the arm itself, and then they're basically invisible from the desk side. So when I look at my desk, I see almost no cables. Like you can see the ends a bit that run out of the foot of the mount, but I would say on average you can see very little cables, and I really like this solution. And finally, as the last comment regarding the screen, I have worked on a two-screen setup for a few years, especially when coding. I found it really helpful to have a browser open on one screen and your code on the other screen, for example. And for video editing too, it was really cool to see your video on a separate screen. Now, I've changed to a single screen because with these 32 inches, it was really big enough for me to still have two big windows side by side and work with them properly. So I would say in 90% of the cases where I work on stuff, I can really get away with this one screen, and it makes the setup look a little bit cleaner. Now, for the few times that I actually want to work with two screens, it still happens from time to time, I just take a spare 24-inch screen that I have laying around and just put it somewhere on the desk where there's space and then work with two screens. Let's talk about the two things that you're in contact most when you're working with a computer. Obviously the keyboard and the mouse. Now, I have some very boring choices here, I would say, but they work really well for me. So when it comes to the mouse, I'm using Logitech's MX Master 3. This is a mouse I think that very many people are using, and arguably it's probably the best mouse you can get. It works really well for me too, and what I really like about it is that it has this horizontal scroll wheel, which, especially for video editing, is just a must for me. I worked with the Magic Mouse a lot of years before and I was actually quite happy with it, but over time I think it was not as comfortable for the wrist to work for long hours, so at some point I went for the MX Master 3 because also so many people recommended it, and I don't really look back. I don't think it's a lot better than the Magic Mouse, like it's not night and day, but it's more comfortable for sure, and I think it's just the state of the art and probably the best mouse you can get, so highly recommend. And on the keyboard side, I'm rocking Apple's Magic Keyboard. I've had this for years too. I think it's a pretty safe choice. Like, some people complain that there's not enough key travel, and I guess some people don't like the sound that it makes too. For me, it works really well. I can type quite quickly on it. I have never had any problems. Also not with wrist pain, especially together with the chair and the armrest, as I explained before. So I can type for long hours on it, never had problems. I also don't miss the numpad, which some people are missing, like this is the version without the numpad. It works quite well for me. I also never had a numpad though, so maybe I should try one with a numpad at some point. Maybe that's an upcoming video. But for now, this works really well for me. Next, I want to talk a bit about my audio setup. I work quite a lot with audio because I'm doing hobby recording and music production on the side. And also I think for video conferences it's really important to be heard properly. In addition, like many people probably, I really love music, so it's really important for me to also listen to the music on good speakers or good headphones. So how do I make this work? Everything revolves around this Focusrite 2i2 audio interface, which has two, I think, pretty good microphone preamps. On one of these preamps I permanently have a Rode NT1A connected, so a condenser microphone that I use for video conferences. And the microphone is mounted on this movable arm, so it's basically back here, and when I need it I can just pull it towards me and then use it for video conferences. And yeah, it's basically permanently connected to one channel on the interface. The other channel is currently connected to this microphone up here that you can't see, that I'm using to record this YouTube video. And yeah, I'm running the sound right into the interface and then into Logic on my computer. And in the end, I sync it with the audio and use it that way. Now, when I'm actually listening to stuff or monitoring stuff, I have two different output channels from the interface. It has one headphone port, so a 6.3mm headphone port that goes to the headphones that you saw before. So this is a pair of Beyerdynamic DT770 Pro. Really love these headphones, have been using them for years and really can recommend them. On the second output port of the interface, I have a pair of stereo speakers connected. So these are speakers from a German brand called Teufel. I've bought them quite a few years back, I've had them for quite some time. I think they sound pretty good. I wouldn't mix audio on them because I'm not sure how accurate they are, but to just listening to music, I think they are pretty good and I can recommend them. So what I really like about the two output channels on the interface is that both of them have a different dial for volume. So when I want to switch from, for example, the headphones to the speakers, I don't actually have to switch the output on my computer, but I can just basically set the headphone volume to 0 and then turn up the speaker volume on the interface, which I find really convenient, and in theory, I don't know why you would do that, but you could also use both together. As the last part of this video, I just really quickly want to talk about what I use for video conferencing and why I think this is super important. For me, I work from the home office permanently as a software engineer, as I mentioned before, And I think it's really important to make a, well, as good as possible impression on virtual calls. For me, I really think that sometimes this can make the difference between actually getting the job or not getting the job, whether your video and your audio are fairly professional on a video conference. So for me, I went maybe a bit overboard, but I don't think it's total overkill for what I'm doing. And as I said, I consider this a business investment because I really believe it can make the difference. So for audio, as I said before, I'm using this Rode NT1A that is permanently connected to my Focusrite interface, which already gives really good audio on video conferences. But then additionally, when it comes to a webcam, I think many people just buy a 30 euro webcam from Amazon, and granted, this probably works for most people. I feel though that especially in the current times with lockdowns, pandemics and home office for most people, it can really be a worthwhile investment to invest in a better camera. Now, I've already had this camera that I'm currently using. It's a Canon EOS 650D, but I still think even if I wouldn't have had it, at this point I would recommend it as an investment. These cameras can be gotten fairly cheap from eBay or something because they're quite old already. And Canon released a software which they call the EOS Webcam utility, I believe. I put the link in the description too. Basically you install it and then you just connect a USB cable from your camera to your computer, from your proper DSLR, put a really good lens in front of it, and yeah, once you connect it to the software basically and with the cable to your computer, then you can just use it like any other webcam in most programs. As a final comment regarding my video conferencing setup, you might be wondering why I have the camera mounted in the top right corner of the screen and not in the middle, like most people would probably mount their webcam. I found that if you put the webcam in the middle of the screen with a screen this big, if, for example, you have one participant's video on the bottom left side of the screen, but your camera up there in the middle, it for them looks like you are looking away from them and you're not really looking them in the eye. So what I'm doing with this 32-inch screen for most video conferences, I put the entire video conferencing window in the top right corner so that I'm fairly closely looking into the participant's eyes when I look into the webcam in the top right corner. And then I also have the other area of the screen to do other stuff, like for example take notes or whatever I need to do during the video conference. It also has the nice side effect that I can still use the arm on the screen and just move it freely around because it's not being blocked by the camera in the middle. So I thought it would be fun to record a little segment about what it would be like to have a video conference with this setup. So I'm currently looking into the camera. I have my Tamron 24-70 f2.8 lens on the camera and recording audio into the Rode NT1A. Now, as I mentioned before, what I would do with this setup is have the video conferencing window in the top right of my screen. So if I would look at that window roughly like this, you can already tell that I'm not looking into the camera and it doesn't feel quite as personal anymore as when I look into the camera like this. But I mean, it's close enough. Then again, if the window would be spread over the whole screen and you as a participant would be in the lower left corner, I would be looking down to the lower left corner of my screen, so very clearly not into the camera. And I think, at least for me, this feels very unpersonal and I think it's not a good solution. Instead, looking roughly in the top right corner of the screen makes a lot more sense and looks a lot more personal. And then as the final piece of my desk setup, I have this Philips Hue Go light, I believe it's called. I also put the link in the description. That is just blasting light against the wall behind the screen. I really like this because looking at a dark wall for me while working is a little bit depressing and I don't really enjoy it that much. So on the one side I have the wall lit by this light and I can have it in different colors so it can give different vibes while working, I guess. And you can be in a more concentrated mood if you turn it blue, but you can also be more chill in the evening and turn it a little bit more yellow. And then on the other side, you can't currently really see it because it's dark, but I have a window here that is also behind the desk. So I placed the desk this way specifically. I tried a few different placements, but this is the one that worked best for me because while working I can also look out of the window a little bit and see some outside and some real world in quotation marks, which I think makes working a lot more enjoyable and yeah, works really well for me. This was the tour of my desk setup. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more videos like it and also more detailed looks at every component of the setup, I would invite you to just subscribe to my channels because those videos are definitely coming. And if you enjoyed this video specifically, I would like to ask you to just hit the like button below to help this channel grow a bit. Whatever you're doing, enjoy your day. See you in the next video.